Hello friends and welcome back to Paul's Hardware. This is my first video of the year, my first video that I'm actually shooting this year, and normally at the beginning of January I go to Las Vegas and I attend CES and I get to visit a bunch of different tech manufacturers and check out the new and exciting products that they have in line for the coming year. Unfortunately, due to the ongoing risk of COVID, CES has been switched to an all-digital event this year, and it just happened this week and I kind of missed it. I was watching it a little bit as it rolled out and my enthusiasm just wasn't really there this year. I mostly wanted to keep an eye out to see if any manufacturers were going to launch any products that were really compelling and exciting. And I don't know, maybe some of them did, but I went through all of the press releases and articles that have been written, and I pulled out all of the stuff that I found was interesting to some degree. And so today I'm just gonna walk you guys through that. So here's my recap of CES 2021.
Excellent!
So I'm coming at this from the perspective of a PC gamer or a PC enthusiast who likes to assemble their own desktop PC systems for bang for the buck or for playing video games or because you want to do your own RGB lighting setup. And unfortunately, the status for most DIY PC builders is still pretty dismal right now at the beginning of 2021. We're looking at a really strained supply, in particular with graphics cards, but also with the new AMD 5000 series CPUs that launched towards the end of last year that are still really difficult to get your hands on. So just to start out to sort of set the tone for the year, not good news, and this is an article from Tech Radar, and all the articles I'm going to talk about today are linked in the video description if you want to read further. But basically, NVIDIA said that they are going to be very supply constrained throughout Q1, and unfortunately throughout Q1 for NVIDIA means the NVIDIA fiscal year, which actually ends in April. So we're looking at really limited availability of graphics cards, at least in terms of the supply that's coming directly from the manufacturers, until probably April, May of this year, which I know is not good news for a lot of people, and I wish I had more to say about it than that, but we need to stay patient, and of course, don't buy graphics cards at exorbitantly overpriced prices, because then you'll just be feeding the scalpers and the trolls, and we don't want to do that. Let's talk about actual CES announcements, and I'm going to start with the component stuff from AMD, Intel, and NVIDIA. So first off, we have AMD debuting their Ryzen 5000 series mobile processors. And in fact, there was lots of laptop announcements going on at CES, which is pretty common. They do a lot of finished goods and that sort of thing. There will be H-series CPUs with a 45-watt TDP and U-series CPUs with a 15-watt TDP. The 5980HX is the 45-watt flagship, which is a Ryzen 9 with 8 cores and 16 threads, and a 4.8 gigahertz boost clock. In the 15-watt lineup, we also have a Ryzen 7 5800U, which is also an 8-core, 16-thread processor with a 4.4 gigahertz boost. Now, most of these new Ryzen mobile processors are based on Zen 3, which is the newer version of AMD's 7nm CPU microarchitecture, which is also what powers the 5000 series desktop CPUs. However, you should keep an eye out because there are some Zen 2 based chips in this lineup: the Ryzen 7 5700U, Ryzen 5 5500U, and Ryzen 3 5300U. So for my money, I would try to opt towards the Zen 3 models. Of course, these being mobile chips, they're going to be integrated into laptops, so there were a lot of announcements by laptop partners for models that will use these CPUs, and we should expect those to launch in the next couple months. AMD also made a Threadripper announcement with the Threadripper Pro 3995WX, and actually I believe there are 3 new CPUs in the Threadripper Pro series. These are still also going to be Zen 2 based, so they're still 7nm, but they're not the newest Zen 3 architecture. So if you're not familiar with the different CPU lineups from AMD, you have the mainstream series, which is like your Ryzen based chips. Then you have high-end desktop, which is still geared towards consumers, but it's kind of more the consumer/prosumer lineup, and those are your existing Threadripper CPUs like the 3990X. Then they have Epic, and Epic is made for servers, workstations, for really professional integrations, so it deals with a lot of validation and that kind of thing, and those are also more expensive. These Threadripper Pros are supposed to kind of split the gap between your high-end desktop and your server-grade parts. So they are still made for professional use, but they do have some notable improvements over the standard Threadrippers that are out. So there's actually 4 new models that are all listed right here: 64-core, 32-core, 16-core, and 12-core. Notably, they have increased the DRAM channel capability to 8-channel from the 4-channel setup that you get with standard Threadripper. They also have more PCIe lanes with 128 available versus 72 with standard Threadripper. These are all gonna have a 280 watt TDP, and they have reasonable boost clocks as well, going up to 4.2 gigahertz on the higher core count models, 4.3 gigahertz on the 16 and 12 core options. Here's another chart from the article that shows some of the other varying processors like the 3990X or the EPYC CPUs that are already out. They've also expanded the different types of ECC memory that are supported by Threadripper Pro 3000 series, which includes UDIMMs, RDIMMs, LRDIMMs, and 3DS RDIMMs, which is 3D stacked memory. Meanwhile, on the graphics card front, our friends over at NVIDIA launched or announced or unveiled, however you want to put it, the RTX 3060. Now, the 3060 Ti debuted, like a month-ish or so ago, and although it had a pretty compelling price at $400, it suffered from the same issue that a lot of graphics cards are suffering from right now, which is that you can't find it. They're out of stock everywhere. This one, the 3060, is going to launch in late February for only $330, theoretically suggested MSRP. Article here is from IGN, but you might note that in the announcement slide, they have a bunch of different variants of add-in board partner models, and that is often the case. As you get lower down the product stack, NVIDIA won't bother to do a Founders Edition anymore. They'll just have the add-in board partners create theirs. It's very small here, but it says 12 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory, and that's one of the differences from the 3060 Ti, which has 8 gigabytes. So why is that? Why does this card, which is lower end in terms of price and performance than the 3060 Ti, actually have more memory than the 3060 Ti? And the answer there is in the interface. So you have a 192-bit bus between the memory and the GPU for the RTX 3060. That 192-bit bus is split into 32-bit lanes. So you get a 32-bit lane for each actual physical memory module that can be addressed. So 192 divided by 32 is 6, which means there can be 6 physical modules on the graphics card that can be addressed. Those modules are available in either 1 gigabyte or 2 gigabyte capacities. So NVIDIA had the option with this layout that they chose for the memory to go with a 6 gig frame buffer or a 12 gig frame buffer. And in that case, I'm glad they went with 12 gigs over 6 gigs. It sounds better, it looks better. There's a lot of speculation that they went with more memory because they realized that the cards that they announced last year don't have enough memory. I don't know if that can be verified at this point. I hope the upshot here is that another graphics card on the market means more GPUs on the market and hopefully more of them available for people to actually buy. $330 is a pretty good price as well. Of course, we don't know exactly what the performance is, but we're expecting the RTX 3060 to launch in late February. And finally, for our core hardware coverage, we have Intel, and they have previewed the 11th gen Core Rocket Lake based CPUs, and they're gonna have the Core i9 11900K CPU up at the top, and they also have a new chipset for their motherboards, Z590, and we're expecting these in Q1, according to this article from AnandTech. Now, to be clear, these are still 14 nanometer based CPUs. They are still going to slot into LGA 1200 series motherboards, so you should be able to get a BIOS update for your 400 series motherboard if you invested in that in order to slot in one of these new GPUs. But you also have 500 series motherboards available now if you want to buy one of those, if you're building a new system, or if you're just sick of your 400 series motherboard already. Do note the core count on the flagship is 8 cores and 16 threads. Compare that to last gen with the 10900K, which was a 10 core, 20 thread CPU, and you might think this seems like a little bit of a downgrade, and it probably will be in terms of overall throughput when maxing out all cores and threads with a multi-threaded workload. That said, they have also increased the cache size, and they are claiming 19% instructions per clock performance improvement, which roughly equates to a 2 to 9% bump in your average frame rates for modern games that they tested, which included stuff like Cyberpunk 2077 in CPU limited situations like 1080p when you're playing at higher graphics settings. It also is supposed to hit the same turbo frequencies as the 10900K, which means we should see a 5.3 gigahertz max on a single core and 4.8 gigahertz across all cores. They've also upped the memory standard to DDR4 3200, which brings them up to parity with AMD as far as what the listed base standard is for DDR4. And then another thing they're doing to bring themselves back up to speed with the AMD is PCIe 4.0. You get actually 20 PCIe 4.0 lanes from the processor, and that's actually pretty cool because that means they're giving you 16 probably for your top GPU slot for your graphics card, and then an extra 4 for a PCIe 4.0 NVMe storage drive, which again, incidentally, is the same configuration that AMD provides on their mainstream platform. I think that's a good way to do it, a good standard, and parity between those means you can focus on other things when you're doing comparisons between the two platforms. Another cool thing is the DMI link, which is what Intel calls the link between the CPU and the chipset. Is increased to a by 8 connection, whereas it was by 4. So that increase from by 4 to by 8, as well as the big step up from PCIe Gen 3 to Gen 4, means you have a lot more bandwidth available for your peripherals, connected drives, and stuff like that, which might make it a more viable platform for high-speed storage. And then you're also going to get native support for USB 3.2 Gen 2 by 2, which is a 20 gigabits per second standard, which is a very nice standard with lots of bandwidth for external drives. Now, if you're curious about compatibility here between the 400 series and 500 series chipsets and the processors, Comet Lake is the 10 series, Rocket Lake is the 11 series, so Comet Lake is your 10900K, Rocket Lake is your 11900K. For the B and H 460 and 410 motherboards, you will not have an upgrade path to Rocket Lake. Those are budget chipsets though. If you got Z490, Q470, or H470, yes, you can upgrade. And then of course, all of the new 500 series motherboards, which there's gonna be 3 chipsets for, Z590, B560, and H510, will of course have support for both sets of CPUs. And that pretty much sums it up for the announced stuff in terms of desktop components that your desktop PC builder might be interested in or maybe getting excited about. The one thing I sort of skipped over, along with NVIDIA's announcement of the RTX 3060 as a desktop graphics card, they also have the RTX 3080, and they're going to be porting the 3070 and 3060 as well to all have mobile variants too, something that was expected, but something that they announced. And I have a selection of other stuff to go over quickly, because it's not just computer hardware that they talked about at CES, so let's get right into it with this article from PC World by our good friend Brad Sharkus. This is about laptops and specifically laptop innovations at CES 2021, because like I said, if you're a laptop person or if you need a laptop to get around, there were actually quite a few announcements and some cool products coming up. This is the one I wanted to show off from this article, which is the ASUS ROG XG Mobile, which is the ASUS ROG Flow X13, a small laptop, can have a little partner unit, which is this little unit up here, which is basically an external GPU, which you can connect the laptop to, and then it can use that GPU. It also adds a bunch of ports, which can be helpful for using a laptop, which is often limited on ports. So if you take a compatible laptop like the Flow X13 and you connect it up to the ROG XG Mobile, you will have a much better graphics card to work with. But speaking of NVIDIA's RTX 3080 mobile variants, that is what is in this little device, an RTX 3080. And now granted, it is the mobile version, so it's gonna use less power and it's probably gonna run a lower frequency, and I don't know the exact difference in performance, but what it does mean is that this external GPU dock, which has often been something that can be fairly bulky, because an external GPU dock is nothing new. Lots of companies have been doing it for quite some time, but usually that's a dock that you slot a actual discrete graphics card into versus one that has a high-end mobile graphics card integrated into it. So the upside is going to be the size and the portability and probably the power usage. And the downside is going to be you can't upgrade. It's not a discrete graphics card, so what you see is what you get. Also on the laptop front, we have a bunch of higher-end displays, 1440 displays in particular. Laptops have often been relegated to your 1080 or your 4K. 4K is often a little bit of a waste on a laptop with a smaller screen, but 1440 is a nice in-between, and you can also support higher refresh rates. So laptops have been announced with 144 all the way up to 300 Hertz 1080 displays, and there are even a few 240 Hertz 1440p options that have been announced as well. Webcams have sucked in laptops for quite some time, and there does appear to be a bit of an effort to overturn that stigma. 1080p webcams are becoming more common, and some laptops like the HP Elite Dragonfly Max have an actual 5 megapixel webcam built in that also has a manual camera switch, so you can turn it off if you think the feds are watching you or something. Oh yeah, NVIDIA also talked a little bit about resizable bar support, which is something that I tested here on my channel back when the Radeon 6000 series GPUs launched, so check out one of those videos if you want a little bit more on that. That said, it is a feature of the PCI Express standard, so it is something that everyone expected NVIDIA to integrate as well. But they announced this along with the RTX 30 series laptop GPUs, so they're pitching the support in their laptops right away, but pretty reasonable to expect that this is also going to be available in GPUs CPUs fairly soon. And then I guess it's getting more popular to put liquid metal into laptops. Good job Der Bauer for popularizing liquid metal. It is a little bit more dangerous to use because it is conductive, but laptop manufacturers such as ASUS, who have sort of mastered the process, and I guess it looks they put like a little housing around it so that they can apply it, and they can also make sure it doesn't interfere with other components. My stance on liquid metal has been it's pretty cool in those extreme cooling circumstances where you're trying to eke every last bit of performance out of a graphics card or a CPU, and overclocking in particular. But laptops are another situation that I think makes a lot of sense because you're dealing with components that can output a lot of heat. They're often throttled depending on the temperature that they reach because they're limited in the cooling solutions that can be applied to them. So every little bit is a gain, and for companies that can handle it, like ASUS and Lenovo, you'll start to see laptops with liquid metal cooling more commonly, I think, in the future. Now, Razer has made a splash at CES multiple times in the past. They really like to come out with something that people are like, oh, that's different. It's kind of eye-catching, and they often have had concept products that haven't actually come to market. I don't know if you guys remember that triple display Razer laptop from CES a few years back that was actually stolen. Still one of those unsolved mysteries, I think, in the PC world. But the point being, Project Hazel is what we're talking about here, and it is a mask. Now, since I bring up masks, there's likely to be someone in the comment section who is compelled to post some diatribe about how they don't work or I'm stupid or something like that. And if you're that person, let me just suggest that you go and rub one out instead. I think you'll effectively be doing the same thing. You know, you'll be doing something positive rather than just wasting your breath. If you are one of the people who is responsible and wears a mask, thank you for doing that and continuing to do so. But let me just go over some of the specs of Project Hazel. It's an N95 rated mask. It has active ventilation as well as a UV sterilizer, and it has a clear panel built into it so people can actually see your mouth while you're talking. It has this thing called voice amp, so instead of somebody hearing your muffled voice behind a mask, it actually records what you're saying and rebroadcasts it out of the mask itself. I would be very curious to hear like a sound test of that. And then of course, since it's a Razer product, it has a case with integrated wireless charging as well as, of course, RGB lighting, which I believe the RGB lighting is supposed to tell you the status of the filters because they are removable and replaceable. But when I tweeted earlier today and asked people if they saw anything interesting in the CES 2021 announcements, multiple people pointed to this. And some people like Mike the Manic Geek, who's a longtime follower, pointed out like, if your job involves talking to people directly, the mask mandate, as important as it is often something that can be a bit of a deterrent for that. So having the ability for people to see your mouth and having the ability to actually communicate with them directly might be really helpful for some people in like a retail environment. That said, I kind of have my hopes pinned on the vaccines and the continued rollout of those, but I don't want to get too far off topic for the rest of this video. That was kind of a cool concept product from Razer, and they also had one more, which is maybe a little bit more practical, somewhat depending on how you look at it. But this is Project Brooklyn, which is a gaming chair that has an integrated, massive, flexible, fold-out OLED wraparound screen that pops out and then is just in front of your face, just like that. Deployable 60-inch full surround screen. Now again, this is just a concept, but I feel like this is one of those things that I kind of hope that they actually make. This would probably be insanely expensive, and I have no idea if the OLED, like flexible OLED technology, has evolved to the point where they could actually pull off something like that. But the fact that it's even, you know, sort of something that they're discussing, I think is pretty cool. Another thing is these modular 4D armrests. So the armrest pops out and then your full like tray slides out, and I don't know how they're doing that. That must roll up inside of it as well. I don't know. I was really hoping they would have some more detailed specs on like the screen, other than the size being 60-inch, like what the aspect ratio is, if it's 21:9 or 32:9 or something like that, or the resolution, of course, would be important. But other than the desk built in for your mouse and keyboard and the carbon fiber bucket seat, it has HyperSense Razer haptic feedback built into the chair itself, and of course, RGB LEDs, because you can't have a Razer product without RGB LEDs. And those accents, by the way, are on the edge of the chair right there, at least in the concept model here, as well as a little bit around the base. I think one of the cool things about that chair is like you could just tuck it in a corner and then just sit down and it pops out and, you know, get your mouse and keyboard out and everything, and then you could just play. So it might be kind of compact. But going along the theme of improved display technology, we have transparent screens. So these are all the rage, and LG, for some reason, is showing this thin like see-through display pop up at the end of somebody's bed and completely block the TV that's back behind them on the wall. So I'm sure obviously you'd have a more practical implementation of it than this. But yeah, I don't know, transparent TVs, transparent displays, something like this seems a little practical to me. Like it pops up, it shows you some basic information on there like the weather and whatnot. Obviously there's probably much more cost-effective means of getting this information to your face, but this does seem fairly elegant. It's cool seeing what they can do with OLED stuff though, and LG is kind of at the top of the game when it comes to OLED things, and they are making an LG rollable like display that can expand. So if you can see this image right here, it starts tall and then it shrinks down and it gets smaller and smaller, and that's part of the screen rolling up into the other part of the phone there. I have to say this is one that I called many, many years ago when the idea of like flexible displays first came up. I was like, oh yeah, what if you had your phone, you know, it's that big, and then you could just go like pull it out like that, and part of the screen that's rolled up in there expands, and then you have something more like a tablet size to play a game on or watch video on or something. One of the really cool things about this is it's not one of those concept products that they're just teasing. They say that they're going to launch this in 2021. So I guess we'll keep an eye on that and we'll see if it has as much of a rough start as the folding LED screens that have launched in the past couple years. Here's another product that's maybe a little bit more interesting for home desktop PC users, which is LG's first OLED monitor. And at first I thought they were doing a gaming monitor, but that is not what it is. It is a professional monitor. And that is definitely one of the benefits of OLED, is a really wide color gamut. This one supports 99% of DCI-P3 and Adobe RGB color range. So that means this is absolutely going to be a professional monitor. The model is the ultrafine 3.2 EP950. It's 31.5 inches, 4K resolution. It's a true 10-bit panel with 1,000,000:1 contrast ratio. And again, that 99% DCI-P3 and Adobe RGB gamut. It also has an integrated KVM hub, which again is very useful for people who maybe are in a professional environment. A KVM switch, I should say. So for professional use for content creators, you might be excited about that. For gamers, it's probably more just the idea that, oh my gosh, they made an OLED display that's a monitor, which is something that for some reason has been really hard to get a hold of if you like OLED and you also like actual PC monitors versus using a TV as such. This is the ASUS ROG Swift PG279QM. So it's a 27-inch 2560 by 1440 display with a 240 Hz refresh rate and G-Sync variable refresh rate support. It also is an IPS panel, so it's actually got pretty good color reproduction, 95% of the DCI-P3 color gamut, a 1 millisecond gray to gray response time, display HDR 400 compatibility for HDR support, and since it is an actual G-Sync monitor, you also get the performance overlay capability, so it will work with NVIDIA Reflex Latency Analyzer, which is a really cool thing. If you haven't seen any of the videos on that, you should check it out. This should be available later in Q1, but ASUS has not told us what the price is going to be, since it is one of their high-end ROG monitors with like the big RGB display on the back and everything like that. It's probably going to be on the more expensive side. We also have the Acer Nitro XV282KV. This is a 28-inch IPS panel, and this is a 4K monitor, but you can also set it to 2560 by 1440 and get 240 Hertz. At 4K, you can do 144 Hertz refresh rate. It is certified for AMD FreeSync Premium variable refresh rates. It has HDMI 2.1 inputs, and again, you can choose that higher resolution 4K with 144 Hertz refresh, which isn't too shabby by itself. Or if you're playing a faster paced game and you want all of the frames possible, just knock it down to 1440 and you can play at 240 Hertz. This should be available in North America in May, and it's going to be starting at $900. Two last things that I wanted to show. A flying car from Cadillac. It's not really a flying car, it's like a personal autonomous air transport thing. So this is what all the rich people, I guess, are going to be using to get around in the future, as all of us proles are trying to go around in our cars or whatever on the streets. It's like a little quadcopter, and you know, I guess you go from your secret lair on top of the building in the huge metropolitan area to your secret lair in the island or in the mountain with the skull or wherever it is. This does definitely seem like something that you should use if you're an evil supervillain. And look, you can land and immediately get into the Cadillac. It's like one of those pizza boxes that keeps your pizza warm. Very exciting stuff. Almost as exciting as this ice cream maker. So for a scant $500 to $1,000 estimated retail price, you have the Cold Snap. which is an ice cream maker that can actually take one of these cold snap pods and spit out ice cream in 90 seconds. That's kind of cool, I guess. But it is also like a Keurig style, which means, you know, you gotta buy the pods yourself. And it's $500 to $1,000 for an ice cream maker. So practically speaking, this is not very practical at all. There's your cold snap brews. They look like cans of beer for some reason, but there it is. For anyone who is really, really looking to waste some money, I guess the cold snap is probably right up your alley. But guys, that's all for my CES 2021 coverage. I have to say it was a little bit easier to get through this year than in years past when I've had to, you know, book a hotel and drive to Vegas and go to a bunch of meetings and stuff like that. But at the same time, I miss it. I really enjoy actually going to events from time to time, you know, at a reasonable pace throughout the year. And I really hope that next year we can get back to CES as normal. So until CES 2022, that's all for my CES coverage. And if you're looking for more regular coverage on my channel, I do have more videos coming at you really soon. I think for the time being, since it's so difficult to actually buy parts and build a computer, I'm gonna focus on some personal projects that I'm doing here, such as rebuilding my stream system and a bunch of other stuff. I actually have lots of stuff to work on and do, so stay tuned for that content. Hit the subscribe button if you're not already. Hit the thumbs up button on your way out. Check out my store at paulshardware.net where you can buy shirts and mugs and pint glasses and all sorts of cool merch like that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope this year is better than last year. We'll see you guys in the next video.